Hi. Today I wanted to talk about what we mean when we say do hard things. To us, it means lean into anxiety and feel your feelings. More specifically, do your exposures. If you have OCD, you know what an exposure is, hopefully. If not, I can give you a brief introduction. So the term exposure comes from a therapy modality called exposure and response prevention, most commonly referred to within the OCD community as ERP. So the idea behind that is if you repeatedly expose yourself to triggers, which are the things that cause the bad feelings, it could be guilt, panic, worry, uncertainty, anxiety, fear. If you expose yourself to things that cause these feelings, then eventually you will habituate, which means that your brain will stop associating bad feelings with those particular triggers. It sounds counterintuitive to a lot of people, but in fact, it's like one of the only things that's been really successful for me. I can just tell you a little bit about that. My first, therapy relationship, I went to this woman who specialized in postpartum mood disorders, which I thought that I had. It turns out that it was just OCD, and I have OCD anyways. I'm not even in the postpartum period anymore, and I still have it. But when I told her what I was experiencing, like my intrusive thoughts around harming Lucas, or like harm coming to him, or like harm coming to myself, she said, yeah, this is OCD. And I said, well, how do I fix it? What can I do? And she said, well, your hormones are just going crazy right now, or your brain is just malfunctioning right now. So what we can do is we can just avoid doing the things that cause those bad feelings, like until your hormones even out. So what this meant was avoiding being alone with my kid, basically. So when my husband was at work, I would go to my father-in-law's house. And there I would just still have intrusive thoughts, but I wouldn't be worried that any of them would come true because I wouldn't be alone. And somehow my OCD made this rule that if I was alone, then all these crazy things that I thought were more likely to happen, which we know isn't true. So anyways, that didn't work, obviously. And eventually, like, my OCD came back worse than it ever was when I had my second kid, because now I was responsible for not one, but two people. So my OCD just ramped up even more. And since I had learned to avoid things that made me uncomfortable, my OCD had spread not just around harm obsessions, but it had moved to tunnels, it had moved to swim class, it had moved to just driving in general. I couldn't drive when I was tired. I couldn't watch my kid in swim class because I kept seeing him drown. I couldn't let my son in a car with somebody else if they were going to go on the freeway because I had all these intrusive thoughts about him dying. So it was getting pretty out of control. So I found a specialist in OCD, and that's where I learned what ERP is. So I can tell you from experience that ERP is really successful, and I can tell you that doing things that scare you is the way to go. So an example of that is like when I had my tunnel fear, the way that we tackled it was basically by making me drive through the tunnel like 100 times until I wasn't scared anymore. And my friends can tell you about this because I would call them because it was too scary for me to do. But if you start small, ERP can be really successful. So my first thing that I did was drive through the tunnel with John because he could be there to support me through these hard feelings. And I would cry, and I thought that I couldn't breathe and everything, but once I got through, I was so proud of myself, and that's the feeling that I held on to for the next time. And once that got easier, I had to drive through talking to people on the phone. And once that got too easy, I would go through by myself. And, my therapist is right. I habituated and now I can just go through tunnels, no problem. And this strategy can really be applied to anything. It can be applied to any situation, like where anxiety is concerned. So that's it. I just wanted to explain more about why we say do hard things and why we really want you to lean in and feel those hard feelings. Because just through experience, I know that feelings are just feelings, and eventually we can learn to tolerate them. And eventually things that seemed really, really scary and intolerable can become totally normal and even enjoyable. Okay,